Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to episode number 50 of At Your Service with Haber and Martinez. I'm Haber, that's Martinez, and we're here to be at your service. Episode number 50 is entitled, Bad Things Are More Apt to Occur When Imbibed, Faded, or Crossfaded. Basically, what we're going to talk to you about today is stuff that you already know. Maybe you don't know that you know it. Maybe you don't know everything about it or haven't thought about it in the way that we're going to address it. But what we all know really is the simple truth that if you get banged up in public, the odds are better that you're going to get in trouble than if you get banged up at home. But the odds are still okay that you could get in trouble getting banged up at home. They're better than the odds if you don't get banged up at all. You could still get in trouble, but being banged up, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, or whether it's a combination of booze and controlled substances, changes the equation for many reasons. And we'll get into a little bit of that, but just to give you a kind of teaser, think about this. If you have a police-citizen encounter, right, wrong, or indifferent, and you wind up getting arrested, in today's day and age, there's a really good chance that everything that happened between you and the cop, maybe not what occurred before, but everything that happened once the cop got on scene is going to be caught on body camera. And so therefore, whatever you say and whatever you do and however you behave and however you act, as well as everything that the cop says and does and however he or she reacts or acts, is going to be there for everybody to take a look at. Well, sometimes when you're intoxicated, you're not thinking straight. In fact, I think that's pretty much the definition of intoxicated, isn't it? You're not thinking straight. You are impaired. And when that happens, your behavior and your judgment tend to get skewed or clouded. So offenses can take on a whole different meaning when we're bringing alcohol and or drugs into it. And certain offenses that we'll talk about today strictly revolve around alcohol and drugs. For example, DUI. Can't have a DUI unless there's alcohol, drugs, or a combination of alcohol and drugs. So with that brief introduction, let me say two more things. One, I want to apologize because it's been a while since we've had a live show. We had a couple of court conflicts, and then we had some holiday conflicts. And today there's actually a production conflict. So there won't be any live commentary going on because the show is going to be recorded and then broadcast afterwards. There's a little production issue going on in the studio. And with that, Martinez, que pasta?
Hey, man, just, you talked about drinking and the drug, but specific drugs. What about sniffing glue? Is that okay? Does that
I put that right into the eating Tide Pods category.
I never understood sniffing glue. Sorry, man. Not even as a kid.
Well, it's a cheap man's high. I mean, if you can't afford a bag of weed, or you can't afford a Schlitz malt liquor, maybe you can get your paws on a little Elmer's and sniff away, or some turpentine, whatever floats your boat.
I just love the scene in Airplane where
Lloyd Bridges.
I picked the wrong day to stop smoking. Picked the wrong day. Right. Then at the end, picked the wrong day to stop doing heroin.
Yep. Well, right. that kind of Lloyd Bridges kind of takes us a little where we're going. Although I think his son would probably be a better illustration.
Which one?
At least his role as the dude.
But the dude was always drunk, right?
Right. Well, that's kind of my point, right? Lebowski was, he was always hammered. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today, getting hammered and how that can affect your case. Yeah. I think we touched on I touched on the real starting point, which would be impairment affects judgment. And that's really, if you think about it, let's take a DUI, for example, or a BUI, either way. It is not illegal in the state of Florida or anywhere else that I know of, but let's just stick with the state of Florida. It is not illegal to drink and drive. There is no crime called driving after consuming alcohol. There's also no crime for consuming controlled substances and driving. There is, however, a crime if you are driving and your normal faculties are impaired, or if you are legally intoxicated. And the definition of legal intoxication in Florida is having a breath or blood alcohol level above 0.08. So none of us, and they do sell, by the way, plenty of personal breathalyzers. I bought them. I've given them out as party favors, in the past.
You're so much fun at parties, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, and they are fun. I didn't have a full blown intoxilizer. We have a couple colleagues who do. They actually own intoxilizer and breathalyzer machines, professional law enforcement grade, and they have used them for personal study and whatnot. But I have I bought a reasonably priced, although again not professional grade breathalyzer, just for shits and giggles for my own fun. To just sit around. I'm at home. I'm having a glass of wine. I'm curious what I'm going to blow, and so at least it gives you an idea. Again, it's not professional grade, but it gives you some idea.
And I want to touch on something also about being impaired. When you're doing something that's legal like driving, but you can't do it while you're impaired. You cannot carry a concealed firearm if you have a concealed firearm license
or any weapon, not just a firearm.
Anyway, but even if you've got a concealed weapons license, you cannot carry a concealed weapon with your license if you're impaired. So a lot of people don't know that. I think if I've got my weapons license and I've had a couple of drinks, it doesn't matter. No, you cannot be impaired while you
and you're also not allowed to carry it. One of the prohibited places is in bars.
Right, but let's say you're at a party, you're at a friend's house, and you're leaving the house. If you're impaired and they catch you with a firearm on you, walking down the street or anywhere in public, and you've got a weapon on you and you're impaired, that's against the law too. So you got to keep in mind that being impaired for almost anything you do is going to create a problem. And that's part of the point of this show today is being impaired when any kind of activity that involves law enforcement having any kind of responsibility for that is going to create a problem.
And as we said, certain crimes, being impaired or being intoxicated, are a necessary element, right? Again, going back to DUI or BUI, if you're not legally, provably impaired or intoxicated, you cannot possibly be convicted of that offense. Doesn't mean that an officer can't arrest you and allege that it happened. There's always a difference between what happens on the roadside with a jury of 1 and what happens in a courtroom with a jury of 6. So those are different things. But, if you think about some of these offenses, like, for example, let's take minor in possession. Again, if you're not in possession of an alcoholic beverage, you cannot be charged with minor in possession. You have to be in possession of it. Public intoxication or drunken disorderly conduct. Again, being intoxicated or impaired is a element of that offense. So if you're not intoxicated or impaired, you can't do it. Now, you can still be disorderly and have other types of offenses for disorderly behavior or obstruction of justice, but not disorderly intoxication. For intox, they're going to have to prove one way or another that you were actually intoxicated or impaired.
Barfing on the cop's shoes.
Maybe.
That's not good. It tends to prove you might have been impaired.
Well, actually, that's an important point, right? Because it's the little things that you never think of that can be a very big deal inside of a courtroom. The text message that you didn't think anything of when you sent it might be introduced as evidence against you in a case and be extremely damning later on in a courtroom when wielded by a prosecutor. If you've happened to vomit on the police officers, let's say you get pulled over for DUI and the officer says, step out of the vehicle. And as you open the door and go to step out, you puke all over the floor. If that's caught on body cam, that's not going to play very well. Go ahead. You want to say something?
Posting on Instagram or on Facebook pictures of you having shots with your friends hours before you got pulled over. Yeah. Tend to be incriminating and very damning. I see people do that all the time. And Mike, for the life of me, I don't understand it. I really don't. What is the need to let people know that you are an adult drinking alcohol? We got it. Not a big deal. Nobody cares.
Well, in the defense of the people who post, they want to share something of what they're doing. They're having fun. In the moment, here's the point. In that moment, at that time, it's innocuous.
Right.
The problem is that you're not thinking 3 steps ahead. You're not playing 3-dimensional chess, and you're not worried about what might happen later. So, these are the types of things that become important. And again, it's all decision making. So, let's run back to DUIs, because DUIs are real easy to work with, right? Many people will have a drink with dinner, a glass of wine, a beer, a mixed cocktail, whatever. Many people will have more than one, but let's just stick with the person who has one drink with dinner. They have a full meal. They're not diabetic. They don't have any physical maladies. They have their one drink. They eat a full meal. They, take their time. They're not rushing. They're feeling 110%. There's no question in their mind that they're capable. They actually have the mental wherewithal to go through that process and evaluate in their own mind, should I drive? Should I not drive? No, I'm okay. I'm perfectly fine. Maybe they even have their own little pocket breathalyzer and they blow into it and see, oh yeah, no, I'm 0.000 or 0.001. I'm good to go. None of that matters to the officer that pulls you over. Because if you get stopped for any reason or for no reason, even for an illegal reason, at the end of that traffic stop, the officer's going to, at the beginning of that traffic stop, the officer's going to walk up to your driver's window and it's going to ask for your license, registration, and proof of insurance, as they do in absolutely every single traffic stop, bar none. And if they smell that drink on you, you're already behind the 8 ball. Now, it may very well be, again, true, honest, provable. You are not impaired. You had one drink. There is no other issues here. But Officer Unfriendly has now smelled it. And in his or her suspicious mind, there may be foul play afoot.
Why you got to use a charge term like Officer Unfriendly? He might be a friendly guy, just doing his job.
Maybe yes, maybe no. But I'm going with Officer Unfriendly because at this moment, I want you to assume that you're going to get stopped by the worst possible police officer on the planet, which is what you should always assume.
Always.
You should always assume that you're going to have the worst cop, the worst judge, the worst jury, the worst prosecutor.
That's a life mantra. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Exactly, because it only gets better from there, right? So if you do get stopped and the officer does smell it, now the issue is going to be, where does that cop's head fall, right? Because police are people too. So maybe the police officer is thinking and putting him or herself in your shoes and saying, oh, you know what? I had dinner with my wife or my husband the other night or my best buddies, and I had a glass of wine or a beer, and I knew I was okay to drive, and I did, and it wasn't a problem. And maybe that's exactly what happened here, right? Or maybe you have the other side and you do have Officer Unfriendly, and that officer is not willing to give you a break. And as far as that officer is concerned, you smell like booze, you're banged up. Now it's on you to prove that you're not.
Well, there's another issue that comes in, Mike, in fairness to, or not, depending on how you look at it. Many times the officers are also thinking, and this is an unwritten policy in a lot of police departments, they can't take the risk. If they're not 100% sure that you're not impaired, 100% sure,
right?
You're not impaired, they have to arrest you, because if they let you go, it's already been called in. When they start,
not necessarily on a traffic stop, because they don't always call it in as a DUI. I mean, if you're weaving all over the road, they're going to call that in as a DUI. But if they pull you over for speeding, it's not a DUI call.
Let me clarify. When they tell you, sir, I smell an odor of alcohol in your breath, please step out of the vehicle, that's official. Trust me. When they do that,
but they haven't called it in. They have not necessarily radioed that in and made a record that they are now conducting a DUI investigation.
But once they do, unless they're 100% sure, which is rare, they're going to arrest you, because the fear is, what if he's wrong? What if he got it wrong and you drive away and you crash and kill somebody?
Exactly.
So in fairness to them, if they're not 100% sure that you're not impaired, they're going to arrest you. Now, we may not like it, but that's why you hire people like Mike and I to fight the case and either get you a very good plea based on what the traffic stop was, or maybe even win the case or get it dismissed. But in fairness to them, they can't take a chance.
And by the way, that holds equally true and is very commonplace with every single 100% of domestic violence calls. If a police officer is dispatched to the scene of a domestic violence case, the overwhelming odds are somebody is getting arrested, because the odds that they're going to walk away, no matter what anybody says, and run the risk that somebody winds up in the hospital or the morgue later is pretty slim. And that is an unfortunate reality. It does happen. But let's go back to the officer bona fide smells alcohol, okay? And he says to you, or she says to you, Mr. Martinez, have you been drinking tonight? And Ed says, yeah, well, officer, yes and no. I just had dinner with my buddy Haber. I had a beer with dinner. You know, I'm perfectly fine. It was one beer. We had a full meal. I'm not on any medication. I'm very well rested. I'm perfectly capable of driving. I'm definitely not intoxicated. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I didn't drink. I did. I had one beer. That was it.
Right.
Now you are at the mercy of that officer who may or may not believe that. That officer more than likely, can't tell you for sure what's going to happen because, anything can happen, but more than likely the officer is going to say, okay, no problem. Do you mind doing me a favor and taking some sobriety examinations so that I can know for myself and make my own decision whether or not I think you're impaired? Now you have a catch-22 because many people on their best day, under the best circumstances, in the best of possible conditions, cannot perform those tests to standards. They're difficult for many. If you have any physical conditions, if you have a bad back or a bad hip or plantar fasciitis, I mean, virtually anything, if you have vertigo, if you have an inner ear issue, if you have a head cold, if your sinuses are off, almost anything can affect your ability to perform those tests to the standards that the officer expects.
And in keeping this real and being fair to both sides, one of my pet peeves is the officers will tell everybody when they testify, well, we'll give them full instructions, but they really don't. They never do. I have never seen an officer say what they really mean, which is, for example, I want you to do the walk and turn. Your feet must touch perfectly heel to toe. No, they tell you touch heel to toe, which in my mind and most people's mind is, look, if I'm off by a quarter of an inch, half an inch, what's the big deal? No, they have to be perfectly touching. They have to absolutely touch, and they have to be perfectly aligned. If you're off 1 or 2 inches to the right or to the left, they write all that down as a sign of impairment, but they don't give you those instructions. So if you're told to do roadsides, believe me, unless you know exactly what that officer is looking for, he's not going to tell you. And
well,
I don't
even
know
if they
or
and,
what.
And even if they do, because I've seen plenty of DUI body cam video where the officers physically show them exactly what it is that they expect. They tell them and they show them. Not all do, but some do. The smart ones do because they know it's going to be played back and they don't want a smarmy lawyer like Martinez cramming that down their throat. They want to be able to say, no, sir. Not only did I tell him, I showed him. I expressed it to him verbally and physically and then asked if he had any questions. So smart ones will do that. But the point is, again, even an Olympic athlete can have a problem doing some of these tests. And even if you have good balance and you have no medical issues, remember, most of the time, it's not always because it could be daytime, but a lot of time it's in the evening. You've got police blue and red strobe LEDs flashing in front of you, behind you, to the side of you. You've got traffic driving by you, speeding up and slowing down. You've got the pressure of uniformed police officers with guns and badges and bulletproof vests standing over you, holding flashlights, taking notes. It's a very imposing environment. So that affects people's ability to perform on these things too. So again, you may not be banged up, but your performance may not be up to par. Now, in fairness, like Ed likes to do, there are people who take those tests and get walked and put back in their car and sent home on their way because they have convinced the officer sufficiently that, yeah, it's true. I had one drink with dinner, but I'm perfectly fine. Look, I can take your tests.
I gotta tell you, I've never seen it.
I have seen it. I know people who it's happened to, but in my experience, it's the exception to the rule. And the question is, are you willing to run that risk? Because even if you pass the test, the next step is they're going to ask you for breath. And if you refuse breath, it's an automatic arrest. And if you agree to breath, then the question becomes, where do you blow? Because you could still be arrested even if you blow under 0.08, because they can then proceed on that second tier of, well, he may not have been legally intoxicated with a 0.08 plus, but in my opinion, as an officer, in my experience, this individual's normal faculties were impaired because he or she did X on the road, X on the road side, and these were my observations and my conclusion. Now, look, your defense lawyer will handle that later, but it all comes back to the topic that we start with, which is being imbibed. If you don't drink, if the officer does not smell alcohol on you, then your speeding stop or even your swerving stop, right? Sir, do you know why I pulled you over? You probably pulled me over because I just swerved, between those lanes. Yeah, well, why did that happen, sir? Well, I dropped my phone. Honestly, officer, I know it's a bad excuse, but I was holding my phone. I dropped it, and I went to pick it up, and my car crept over.
Right.
So you may walk away from that without the odor of alcohol, but with the odor of alcohol, you are behind the eight ball.
Not buying it. And Mike, it goes to other areas. For example, let's talk about either a domestic violence or let's talk about a battery. Let's talk at a party. Let's look at this where we're at a party. We're at a party, and I've been drinking. I've had a couple of beers, nothing more than maybe a beer or two. And you show up to the party and you say something stupid, you insult my wife or you insult me. Next thing you know, there's a fist fight. Everybody at the party is going to say, well, did you see what happened? Yeah. Was anybody drinking? Well, Martinez was. Haber had nothing to drink, but Martinez does. Immediately, let's be honest and let's be realistic. The implication is that the guy that was drinking probably either A, started the fight or reacted inappropriately because he's been drinking. So it goes back to what we're saying. When you're drinking and when you have too much to drink, especially, automatically you're behind the eight ball. You just need to acknowledge that and be ready for that. That people are going to assume, and cops are human beings. If we go to trial, we're going to have human beings that are going to be your jurors. These things are just, what we're trying to bring awareness to is that a lot of times things that you can walk away with or explain will end up getting you arrested simply because you were drinking or doing drugs.
And again, some crimes revolve around those as necessities. So, let's take another really easy example. Possession of a controlled substance. If you are stopped or detained or otherwise involved in some police-citizen encounter, which results in them conducting a pat-down or a search of your person, which results in the discovery of controlled substances on your person. Or we could take another example, open container violation. You're walking down the street drinking a beer, or you're driving your car with an open beer in the vehicle. Any of these things are per se offenses. So you get popped for a possession offense, be it open container or be it a controlled substance. Now you have the crime simply because you had that on your person or in your, right, constructive possession or joint possession. But let's just stick with actual physical possession because that's the easiest one to deal with. Right. So if for whatever reasons, let's say that I'm just walking down the street, minding my own business, doing absolutely nothing wrong, but it just so happened that the police received a report from somebody of an offense or of a suspicious person or something that matched my description that triggered a police approach to me. Regardless of whether I did or said anything wrong, if it gets to the point where they say, sir, I'm going to need you to, stand up against the wall and pat you down, and they find that pill bottle or that container, or that baggie of weed or whatever, again, you may beat the case in court. Ultimately, it could be an illegal search. It could be an illegal seizure. It could be a bad arrest. It could be any of a number of reasons, but you're not going to beat the rap. You're not going to beat the ride. You might beat the rap, but you won't beat the ride. So you're still going to have a problem.
And you might still have a problem. Look, I have a case that a while back where, and let's assume that my client's telling the truth. I don't really think he had any reason to lie to me when I tell you that what he says were the facts. But let's assume that he's telling the truth, whether you think it's not or it is or not. He got stopped for a routine traffic stop. Cop says, hey, do you mind if I search you and or the car? And he was like, sure. He's got nothing to hide. He's got nothing to worry about, nothing to hide. Cop searches him, takes his wallet, goes through his wallet, and he finds a tiny little baggie with a tiny little bit of cocaine in the bag. And he ends up telling me, Ed, that cocaine has been in my wallet for 6 months. I forgot it. It was months ago. I was out partying. A friend of mine had it. He gave me a little bit, and I put it in my wallet, and I totally forgot it was in there for 6 months. All right. Maybe true. But at the end of the day, he can't beat that rap because he was in possession of cocaine.
I'll give you another example of that, different. It doesn't involve drugs or alcohol, but it's another good example. I had a young man who was pulled over for whatever traffic offense. And the officer asked him for his ID and this and that. And the kid pulls out his wallet and flips it open and pulls out his driver's license and goes to hand it to the cop, not thinking that right underneath his driver's license was his other driver's license, his fake ID. And the officer saw it. He saw the other driver's license. He said, what's that? Kid's like, oh, no, he tries to hide his wallet and shut it. No, sir. Let me see that. And now all of a sudden the kid got arrested for possession of a fake driver's license. So, you know, but let's get back to alcohol, drugs, and the effect that it has on judgment and decision making and criminal court. Because one of the really important things that we all need to understand, I mean, wouldn't this make sense to you? Like, let's say you have a DUI accident, right? And you hit somebody completely, it's a true accident. You happen to be under the influence, but it really is an accident, right? And shouldn't you be able to argue, you know, I didn't intend this. This wasn't intentional. This was an accident. Why am I being charged with a crime? I didn't do anything wrong here.
That's not the way the law says. So you're screwed. That's not what the law says.
But why? But why? Why does the law say that?
You want my personal opinion, or you
No,
want
I mean, I know you know why.
the legislative intent?
No, the reason that it says that is because it's not a specific intent crime.
Right.
There are two different types of crimes, right? Well, three. There's specific intent, where you intend to commit, intentionally plan an act that you intend to commit. Mm-hmm. There's general intent, and then there's strict liability, right? Where you don't have to have any intent at all. Like, for example, statutory rape. Right. You might think that the girl is 19 or 20. She might even show you a driver's license and a birth certificate and offer you a DNA sample. None of that matters. All that matters is how old she actually is, not what you know, not what you think, not what you believe. It's not a defense to the charge. Oh, she told me she was older. I even asked for proof and she showed it to me. That you may be able to argue that ultimately, but that's not going to be a defense.
And the state, if you go to trial, the state will make sure to pick a jury that agrees that they're going to follow the law.
If it's even admissible, because it may not even come in.
Right.
So some judges are not even going to let that in.
Right.
Because it's confusion and misleading. And it's a complete misstatement of the law to make that argument, right? So similarly, there used to be a defense, and some states still have it. Florida has specifically abandoned it. It is not a defense in the state of Florida, called voluntary intoxication, meaning you were so banged up, you got screwed up on X, Y, or Z that you could not possibly have known what you were doing, right? I didn't know I raped that girl. I was drunk. She was drunk. I thought everybody was having a good time. Or I didn't know that I broke into that house. I thought it was my house, right? Irrelevant. You cannot make those arguments of voluntary intoxication. Now, you can make the argument that I made a mistake, but you cannot make the argument that I made a mistake because I was voluntarily intoxicated.
Right. Correct. Not in Florida.
So voluntary intoxication used to be an excellent defense. So what happens, Ed, if I'm out at a nightclub and I'm not even drinking, okay? I'm drinking water intentionally, right? My plan for the evening is to hook up with some young lady. I'm going to stay sober and focused. I'm going to find the right one. I'm going to drink water, and I'm going to wow her and woo her and take her home with me. That's my plan.
First of all, that if it's you, that's complete fiction.
Okay, but we're playing pretend here. So let's say that during the course of my nefarious scheme, somebody slips me a Mickey. Somebody drops a GHB into my glass of water. I have no idea. And the next thing you know, I'm completely out of my mind, wasted. I don't even know where I am. I get behind the wheel of my car and I run somebody over.
Too bad.
Now, that's not voluntary intoxication, right? I'm not going to get up there and argue that I was voluntarily intoxicated.
No, you're going to have to bring in the person who slipped you the GHB.
And they're going to have to admit it.
And they have to admit that they're the one that did that. And if you can do that, good luck.
You don't need a lawyer at that point.
Nope, not going to happen. How about this one? And this really happened to somebody. I won't say who or what the circumstances, but I know it was not one of my cases. Let's say you're out at a club and you meet this amazingly just gorgeous woman and you're so into her and you guys are partying and dancing and having a great time. And she wants you to take some ecstasy with her and you say no, but she ends up putting the little baggie with 2 or 3 pills in your pocket. And you keep dancing with her. And then as the night progresses, you forget that's in your pocket. And then you get
or you never knew.
or you did, but you forgot, or you never knew, and you get pulled over at the end of the night. And hey, can I search you? I got nothing to hide. And they find a couple of pills of ecstasy on you. That's it. That's, as Mike says, the crime. That's an element of the crime. Possession of an illegal narcotic. You are in possession of it. How you came into possession is irrelevant. You're done. It's a crime. And you let them search. So, I mean, there's another moral,
And
right?
sometimes you don't let them search. Sometimes they search anyhow.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they don't give you an alternative always. A lot of cops are going to ask because some percentage of the people are going to say yes, and that just makes their job easier. It's less dangerous. It's less confrontational.
I have done ride-alongs, many of them when I was a state attorney. You'd be amazed how many people say yes. I'm telling you, you would be amazed, knowing that they have drugs on them.
So I'm going to dovetail that because when I was in law school and I was an intern at the state attorney's office, I started doing ride-alongs, and I'm reading these A forms saying to myself, this is so absurd. I don't even know how we could sell this crap to anybody because it's just not believable. I stopped the driver for speeding and asked the driver if there was anything inside of the vehicle I should know about, and he volunteered that he had a bag of weed in the glove compartment. What idiot's going to do that, right?
Right.
Let me tell you something, folks. Go on a ride-along, all right? Just do one midnight shift in any urban police department, and you will find that people truly are that. I'm going to use the word stupid there because it really is stupid.
I prefer naive or gullible.
I'm gonna go with stupid. If you know that you have a bag of weed in your car, you do not give consent to search. Now, they may search without your consent. They may find some other basis to do it, but at least arm your lawyer with the capacity to say that you did not consent to a search.
Correct. And I know we're going off on a tangent here a little bit, but we're going to go right back after this. This is also why I tell my friends, even law enforcement friends, I tell them, I'm not letting you in my house if you come to my house for a reason. If I'm driving and an officer pulls me over and I have nothing to hide, I definitely have nothing to hide. And he says, "Can I search your vehicle?" I'm going to say no. Do you have any reason? Do you have any probable cause or reason to believe you have to search my car? No, I'd just like to. Well, you know what? I'd like to search your car too. You let me search your car first, and then you can search mine. How's that? No.
Right. So I'm gonna say to the folks, that's probably not the way to go. You probably don't want to do a quid pro quo with the police officer. It's not going to set a good tone for the rest of it. But let me tell you, that would be a great. See, that's actually not that far off topic because that is something that someone who's imbibed or crossfaded might say to a cop because their judgment is so far off that they think it's actually funny in the moment.
What are you talking about? I'm sober and I think it's funny.
But some people may actually think that, because again, that's part of the whole impairment thing, right? I mean, we don't need to go through the metabolism and the biological and the biochemical processes of intoxication or impairment. We all know it, okay? There are very few people who have never had any alcohol or substance in their body ever, whether it was recreational or under the direction of a doctor or surgery or a prostate exam or any reason you have to be sedated, right? Those are controlled substances. Mm-hmm. And if you've been ever given any type of anesthesia, I mean, I'm not talking about Novocaine at the dentist, but laughing gas at the dentist is a good example, right? If you're given nitrous, your judgment is askew and you look at the world through a very different filter. So you may act or react in a way that to you makes sense or is logical or is humorous or has design and purpose to achieve a goal, such as, hey, joking around with the cop, patting him on the back, right? But when you pat the cop on the back as a joke, that's a battery on a law enforcement officer.
I'm not patting him on the back. And let's be clear. I still think it's hysterical to tell the cop that, but I wouldn't do it myself in real life. I wouldn't do that unless the cop is already joking with me and we've got a good rapport. But normally they're not. They normally do not have a sense of humor.
No, normally they're serious as a heart attack.
And so I would simply tell them, look, I'm not going to let you search my car. I can't. I have a right not to let that you. And if you want to get a warrant, by all means, get a warrant. But I'm not going to let you search me or my car because you just really never know what's going to happen.
When we talk when we talk about hashtag UpX2, shut up and lawyer up, invoke the fifth, invoke the sixth, there are very respectful and polite ways to do that. Again, these are things that you may not necessarily think of when you're banged up on alcohol or controlled substances. So the odds that you're going to be, and some people are consummate professionals with alcohol and controlled substances, right? There is some percentage of folks that function well, and there's some percentage that function actually better. You know, they self-medicate with different types of things. And through their experience, they've learned that they're actually more functional if they smoke weed during the day, or if they have a martini at lunch, or, you know, whatever. But that's the exception to the rule. Most of us are going to be more aloof, less focused, less concerned about consequence. That's just what the biochemical process does as it affects the brain. It affects your judgment. It truly does. Now, whether or not, when we talk about DUIs and BUIs, whether or not, you know, standing on one leg and hopping like a chicken while singing the Star Spangled Banner backwards is an indication of your ability to operate a motor vehicle safely is a topic for another show. But whether or not your judgment is off is where we're at right now.
Right.
So it's very easy for you to say or do something untoward or something self-destructive. And in today's day and age, you have to be really, really concerned about this. Ed brought up a real good point earlier about posting on social media. You're having a good time in the moment, but you're not thinking about what's going to happen later. Now, if you're not driving, no problem. You don't have to worry about DUI. But there are still other things that could happen, right? You could still have a domestic violence incident. You could still have a barroom brawl. You could still have some event that occurs out in public that you wind up in the middle of. And all of a sudden, there's this preserved digital history of you, you know, doing shots on the tabletop,
Right.
which is never going to be helpful. You know, it may help you in a wet T-shirt contest, but it's not going to help you in a courtroom.
Well, I don't know if anything could help me if I'm in a wet T-shirt contest, but that's a story for another time. But let's talk about another scenario that we might not think of, right? I had a client who was hammered. He was at the club with his girlfriend, Mike, so hammered he didn't remember the events of what occurred. And he was going to take an Uber. He wasn't going to drive. But something happened in the club, and the on-duty officers at the club had to get involved. And all the on-duty officers say they did, and the body cam only shows, is the officer coming over and telling him once he's outside the club that, you know, he's got to go. They don't want him in the club anymore, and he's got to go. And he had an incident with the bouncers inside the club. Well, he ended up in the hospital, Mike, with a couple of broken ribs, and some other injuries. But nobody could remember how it happened. Nobody remembered how it happened. We couldn't get the videos from the private business because allegedly the cameras weren't working. Had he not been so impaired, he would have been able to say, I remember exactly what happened, this, and this. But he was so impaired, Mike, he doesn't know what happened. Now, let's be honest. Getting kicked out of a club, they break your ribs. That's not normal. So something must have happened. And I'm pretty sure, as being a former bouncer and working as a bartender for many, many years, I know exactly what happened. But how are you going to prove it if you're so impaired that you can't even testify at your own trial? So there's nothing that can be done. So, you know, there's so many things that affect your life and your case, be it civil or criminal, when you're so impaired or imbibed.
I was involved in a case many years ago where my client's vehicle was involved in a DUI fatality. It fled the scene. It wasn't located until sometime after the incident. The incident was observed. Nobody saw my client behind the wheel of the car, but it was clear that my client's car was the instrument of the fatality. It was the instrumentality of the death. There's no question about that. Long story short, ultimately officers were dispatched to my client's home. They ran the registration and the tag, showed up at his house, asked him where his vehicle was, and he took him downstairs to the parking garage where the vehicle was not. They had a conversation that resulted in an agreement that the vehicle must have been stolen because the guy said the last time I saw my car was. In any event, the bottom line was he had been out all night drinking, and he had been probably GHB'd. He was probably slipped a Mickey at a club. There was no question that he was driving the car because the search warrant that they ultimately got, they recovered clothing from his bathroom. When the cops showed up at his house, he was in a towel. He had just gotten out of the shower. So when they went back to his house with the warrant, they found the clothes in the bathroom in a pile that had shards of glass all over it that they used a glass expert to match to the glass from his windshield. And then based on the spray pattern of the glass inside the vehicle, there was nobody in the passenger seat because the passenger seat had shards on it, whereas his seat just had the outline of his body with no shards, and his clothes were covered in shards. So there was no question scientifically evidentiary linking the fact to this. But when you ask this kid, when his lawyers asked him, hey, you know what happened? I don't remember. I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't know. And that's similar to the story. In fact, not similar. That's pretty much what he told the police. He told the police he had been out the night before. He thought that he had driven his car home and parked it because he didn't know how else he could have possibly gotten home because he knew he had driven to the club, but he had no recollection of any of it. He couldn't remember it. Right. So one of the things that we did was we sent him to an expert in retrograde hypnosis. We actually had him hypnotized by an expert to try and bring these memories out. I mean, this is reaching for straws, but this is how far we had to go to try and understand what happened that evening. This guy was an absolute blank. He was completely just no memory whatsoever.
Even after the hypnosis? Even after the hypnosis?
No. I mean, even the retrograde hypnosis expert said we can't suck any. His mind is a black hole from that evening. Wow. So because of that, this guy had no clue. He really could not help himself or defend himself in any way, shape, or form. I mean, his position was, I can't believe I did this. I refuse to believe I did this because that's not who I am.
Right.
But how do you explain the evidence?
And here's another issue that happens when you're that drunk or impaired by drugs or alcohol, either one. That is not a defense, but it is a scientific reality. We all have that flight or fight or freeze instinct. Many times when you are that impaired and you have an accident, the driver flees and does not remember having the accident and does not remember fleeing. But it's just an instinct that there was a crash, that there was a problem, that there was some type of trauma, and you take off. And now you're also arrested for fleeing and eluding, fleeing the scene of an accident with injuries. And there's leaving the scene of an accident with no injuries.
Yeah, and just to take a broom to the mess that Martinez just made. He's talking about leaving the scene of an accident, which is a crime. Fleeing and eluding is a separate crime. Fleeing and eluding is when the police try to pull you over and you hit the accelerator and take off, which also, by the way, is common in impairment cases. Although I have to say, not that I recommend this, and I want to be very clear, this is not legal advice. In fact, I'm advising you of the exact opposite. Do not do this. But we have heard this happen more than too many occasions, where somebody is DUI and does have an accident, and they do leave the scene of the accident. And if they are not caught until several hours later, the next day, the day after that, they're not going to get a DUI because there's going to be no way to prove the DUI, more than likely. Now, you still have leaving the scene, which is a very serious offense, especially if there's injuries. It opens up a whole new can of worms. But the point is, again, some people will make the intentional decision to do an act. Other people will make the decision, I guess it's intentional either way. Let me rephrase that. Some people will make the unimpaired intentional decision to commit an act. Like, oh shit, I just hit that car. Nobody saw me. All right, let me get out of here. Or it may be that you're under the influence and that you make the act because either it's a fight or flight thing like Ed just mentioned, or you're actually able to do that math in your own head that says, I'm banged up, I just had an accident, I better get the hell out of here. So either way, it's the impairment component is what we're focused on here, but all of that is bad. Okay, the law for, just so we're very clear, the law for an accident is you have a duty to remain on scene until the accident has been reported. Now, you don't always have to involve the police. If you have a minor fender bender or if you hit a vehicle that's unattended, you do need to remain on scene and provide your information. So in other words, if Ed and I don't know each other, I rear end him, he rear ends me, we can simply exchange information, or we could decide we don't want to do anything and go our own ways, which is very foolish. You definitely don't want to do that because you never know if he's going to come after you later and claim something. So it's always smart in that moment, no matter what, make sure that you exchange information. Take a picture of his driver's license, give him a picture of yours. Take a picture of his insurance card, give him a picture of yours, or call the cops. If you call the cops, you don't have to worry about any of it. But if you don't call the cops, there's no way to control what may happen after. But let's assume that Ed's not on scene, or I flee the scene. Again, that is a crime.
You mean
so? If you have an accident with an unaccompanied vehicle, like let's say you clip a parked car and you hit the rear view, you smack the rear view mirror, the thing to do lawfully is stop and leave a note on the windshield of the vehicle or on the door of the vehicle or somehow with your name, your contact information, and say, I'm really sorry, nobody was here, please reach out to me so that I can, give you my insurance information or make good or whatever. And then take a picture of that so that you can prove that you did it, just in case it blows away or the person who receives it claims that it never got there, or some other person takes it, which could happen as well. Mm-hmm. So, I know many people who have had that problem where they wind up with a red flag on their driver's license because they didn't pay a parking ticket. But they swear on, a busload of bishops and a cardinal to boot, they would never saw any parking ticket. You know why? There are asshats out there that run around taking people's parking tickets. They think it's funny. They take them right off their windshield. So the person who got the ticket never even knows that they got the ticket.
I've never heard that, but I wouldn't put it past some people.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a tangent. But again, let's.
I want to go to something you put in the promo today. Indecent exposure. I don't think I have ever had an indecent exposure case.
Oh, I've had plenty.
And I'm assuming 90% of the time they're impaired.
Not always. A lot of times you get an indecent exposure case from somebody who really, really, really has to go to the bathroom, and there ain't no bathroom in sight. That can be an indecent exposure case.
It can be.
So,
absolutely. But I mean, you would hope they do it somewhere where nobody was watching.
Yeah, but sometimes you don't know that people are watching, and sometimes people happen upon you when you don't expect them to. So, look, the point is it can happen, all right? And it can be a bona fide, legitimate situation. For indecent exposure, you don't have to intend to wave your privates at the planet. That doesn't have to be your plan. You just have to do it. So, that's kind of the catch-22 there.
And I'm assuming they were impaired, most of the ones you had? Or no?
Most of the ones that I had were not impaired, but most of the ones I had were actual indecent exposure cases where people were exposing themselves, as they should not be doing. But I'll tell you, I had one not too long ago, which was actually an interesting case where the guy was in the bathroom at a mall, in the public bathroom by the food court in a mall. There was a off-duty normal civilian clothed police officer in a stall. The police officer comes out of the stall and claims to see my guy standing sideways to the urinal facing the door to the entrance to the bathroom, where there are a couple of teenage boys who are standing there aghast looking at my guy who's doing something that he shouldn't to himself while
he was using the power shake.
He was exactly. He was doing something he shouldn't be doing, according to this officer. So the cop says in his statement, he says, "I told him I'm a police officer and to stop, and the kids took off and ran. And he zipped up his fly and walked out of the bathroom, and I chased him and took him into custody and detained him. Couldn't find the juvenile subjects." The alleged victims. So the officer himself claimed victim status. He's the one who swore out the victim complaint in this case and called a uniform officer on the scene to make this indecent exposure arrest. So the uniform officer shows up. My guy is already on the floor. He's been detained by this off-duty police officer. And when the uniform officer shows up, the body cam is now on. So you now get to see and hear everything. And my guy is in tears, saying, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't do this. I don't know what this guy is talking about. I was just trying to go to the bathroom. And the officer saying, the actual on-duty officer is saying to him, well, you know, why were you facing? He says, I was not facing anybody. He goes, I have a urinary tract problem. I have a doctor. It's hard for me to go to the bathroom. I'm on medication. I was trying to go to the bathroom. That's all I was doing. So you have two divergent stories here, right? I mean, one, you've got this officer making it very clear that he saw my client intentionally committing a lewd act in front of kids. Now, if they had caught the kids and if the kids had given such a statement, it wouldn't have been a misdemeanor indecent exposure. It would have been a felony lewd and lascivious act, right? It would have been a much more serious offense. But because they couldn't get the kids or they didn't get the kids, it was a misdemeanor offense. And ultimately, we were able to produce not only the medical records from my client's urinary, whatever you call a urine doctor, I forget what the name is, but from a urologist, from his urologist, and we were able to actually prove his medical condition, his treatment, the fact that he's been in treatment with his doctor for 2.5 years prior to this incident. He's on medications. He's got a completely documented medical history, no prior criminal history. And on top of that, I had a psychosexual evaluation done by him by a sex deviant psychiatrist, or rather psychologist, to do a battery of exams on this guy. That, of course, came back and said the guy's not a sex predator.
But I have a question for you. I know you don't like taking depots, but come on, you didn't take this guy's depo? Because I would have loved to have said, hold on. I would have loved to have said, well, you say you saw my client's penis? Yes. Please describe it. Size, shape, was it circumcised, uncircumcised, veiny, not? Was he trimmed?
Yeah.
Trimmed? Did he
Now,
shave?
there was no need for any of that, because I was able to create a sufficient record to the state attorney, and I had a very reasonable, understanding state attorney who looked at it honest. See, again, this is something we talked about earlier in the show, and it applies across the board. The cop in the moment, okay, if they are at the point where they are conducting any kind of criminal investigation, I don't give a shit what it is. I don't care if it's a DUI. I don't care if it's a burglary. I don't care if it's an indecent exposure. It's irrelevant, whatever it is. They already have it in mind that you probably did something, or you likely did something, or there's a chance that you did something. And you know what? Many officers, I don't like to say it, but it's true, have already convinced themselves of it. They already made the decision. They are not really conducting any kind of investigation so much as dotting their own I's and crossing their own T's.
They are. I can tell you as a prosecutor, it's kind of close. The way it happens is a little different. But even the best cops, and I tell this to my clients all the time, if they're conducting an investigation, they're trained, their experience, and their instincts are to look for everything that will confirm the crime. Their job is not to look for facts or evidence that will exonerate you from the crime. In other words, they're looking for in other words, in this situation, the cop would be looking for anybody that saw this man's penis. He's not going to go to the mall and say, hey, anybody who didn't see his penis, can you raise your hand? It's just not, and I don't mean this in a bad way to cops. It's just not the way they do investigations. Some are more thoughtful and thorough than others. But again, at the end of the day, the overwhelming odds are if you have a bullseye on you, they've already decided that there's a reason for that bullseye to be there. That's my point. Best case scenario, where you've got the nicest cop. His job is to look for incriminating evidence, not exonerating evidence.
Now we go from there to the state attorney, and you have two different types of state attorneys too. You have state attorneys who are very reasonable, very honorable, and take their job as being a minister of justice very seriously. And then you have others that are little prosecuting robots. And that's all they do. They believe their job is to secure convictions and rubber stamp every single police decision, whether it's right or wrong. So you don't know which type of prosecutor you're going to wind up with. And In this particular case, this guy from the bathroom at the mall, we had a prosecutor who was very conscientious, open to listening. And I've had the exact opposite in other cases, in other similar cases,
Right.
where I've had prosecutors who have said, I don't care what you tell me, your guy is a scumbag and he's going down. I am not going to let this guy walk the streets if there's anything I can do about it. And if you have that, you got a problem. So, and it happens, you know, and sometimes you get judges like that too, right?
Yep.
We have a lot of judges who are very fair and they take their role as being a neutral and detached arbiter of fact and law seriously. And then you have others who just have preconceived, hell-bent notions that are not going to be changed by you, me, or anybody else under the sun. Some of them towards the state, some of them towards the defense. It just happens. It's just the way it is, you know?
It's human nature.
So getting back, I know we've kind of gone all over the place with this, but really what we wanted to impart upon you is if you're going to drink or you're going to use or you're going to do both, and that's a term that I recently learned called being cross-faded. Let me just read you the definition of cross-faded. First of all, being faded means being high or stoned, not drunk. Faded specifically refers to high. But cross-faded means, quote, drinking and or using other drugs. And the example that they give in the Urban Dictionary is, I'm not going to say the actual words, but when you high as S, but S-faced drunk at the same time. E.g., I took 7 bong rips and 5 shots, and I was cross-faded as F. So cross-faded means that you've done a little bit of both. And if it's not bad enough that alcohol can affect your judgment, or the controlled substances can affect your judgment, the combination certainly can. And anybody who has ever picked up any prescription for anything, or even if you've never picked up a prescription, anybody who has ever bought any over-the-counter cold medicine, NyQuil, Tylenol, cold and flu, any of those types of things, every single one of them has a warning on the label that says, do not use with controlled substances. Do not use with drugs. Do not mix with medications. They all tell you that. Why? Because biochemically speaking, and you know, maybe one day we'll have not maybe one day, we will definitely have a toxicologist on the show to have a more detailed discussion. But biochemically speaking, the interaction between alcohol and controlled substances is euphoric or disastrous.
Right.
So people do it sometimes ignorantly, but oftentimes willfully. Okay. You know, it's kind of like what's the stripper drink? I don't mean to label it like that, but you know, that's how I know it. Red Bull and vodka, right?
A stripper drink?
Why do they drink Red Bull and vodka? Why do they call that the stripper drink? Well, because the vodka is a depressant, but the Red Bull is a stimulant. So if you mix them and you take them at the same time, you don't get as banged up as if you're just drinking the vodka, right? Because the Red Bull lifts you back up. You could take much more vodka if you have the Red Bull at the same time. So if you're drinking and you're doing cocaine, the cocaine takes you up, the alcohol takes you down, and if you're really good at your scales, you can balance your consumption and get that sweet spot that you're looking for, hopefully. Yeah. Or you could wind up arrested. So, or you could wind up in the morgue, because let's not kid ourselves, people have heart failure from that sort of shit. So, look, Ed and I don't judge. All right, let me go on the record and say, I can clearly 110% speak for #HaberPA. I do not judge my clients. You do what you do. You're accused of what you're accused of. That is not my business to tell you good boy, good girl, bad girl. That is not my place.
And Michael and I, and a lot of lawyers, defense lawyers, do not fight any harder or any less for a client who confesses to the crime or says, yes, I did it. That's not our role. It's not our place. It's not what we're here for. So
our job, and we get asked this a lot. How do you defend criminals? Well, you know, first off, very few people who I defend are actually criminals. Most of the criminals that I have defended in my life are rotting in a prison, because this is Florida. It's not California. We don't let our hardcore criminals roam the streets. They generally stay in jail. or in prison. Most of the people that I represent are people who are accused of a criminal act, people who are accused of committing a crime. And so my job really is to make sure that from the moment that I am retained, they are treated fairly by the system. My job is to make sure that from the moment that I get on the case, they are not taken advantage of, that their rights are respected, and that any prior indiscretion, anything that happened before I came on that was not up to par, is called out and attacked.
Right.
That's my job. So I don't care what you do. I'm not here to tell you, and far be it from me, by the way, because I'm about as far from perfect as any human being could be. I've made my share of snafus and really bad judgment calls. So I'm not here to judge you. And Ed is the same way. We're not judging you. But we are going to tell you that if you are smart enough to think ahead, then you can avoid an awful lot of trouble, okay? So if your plan is to get banged up, honestly, do it at home if you can, and have somebody there that can look out for you in case, God forbid, you have a bad reaction or your heart stops. I mean, anything can happen. And especially in today's day and age when you don't even know, and I'll give you, another, just by way of example, I'll dovetail it into a real world scenario. But if anybody who's seen the movie Pulp Fiction will remember the scene where Uma Thurman takes what she believes to be a baggie of cocaine out of John Travolta's pocket and snorts a line while he's in the bathroom. Turns out it's very high grade heroin, and she overdoses, and he has to wind up giving her what is it that he gives her? Adrenaline,
Right.
directly into the heart so that she doesn't die. Well, today, while that's always a concern, today you've got fentanyl, right? And people don't know that fentanyl is mixed into a lot of the substances that they purchase on the streets. They're not planning on buying fentanyl. They're planning on buying Adderall, or they're planning on buying cocaine, or they're planning on buying ecstasy, but it's laced. And then bad things can happen. So if you're going to do it, do yourself a favor. Stay out of public. Definitely do not operate any type of heavy machinery, be it a car or a boat or a tractor or even a horse. Don't ride anything. Don't crossfade, please. We don't want you to die or to have permanent brain damage or, to injure anybody else.
And you're right about the problem with crossfading is today you might do it and it turns out fine. And you could do it 100 times, but then the one time, same exact amounts, your body chemistry is different and it's a disaster and you could even die. It's very dangerous.
And again, remember, there is no defense of voluntary intoxication in the state of Florida. So if you do get banged up, you're never going to be able to stand in front of a jury and say, oh, yeah, well, I guess it happened, but I didn't know. I was too screwed up. That ain't going to fly. Nor is it going to garner you any sympathy with the court when it comes time for sentencing.
You can't say, sorry, I picked the wrong day to stop snorting cocaine.
With that, we're going to wrap up today's show. I appreciate everybody's patience. I know it's been several weeks since we did a show. We had some issues scheduling, and then, of course, we had a bunch of holidays and all sorts of stuff that came upon us. I think, in fact, don't we have next week is Columbus Day, right?
I believe so. Let me look.
Now, I mean, are we allowed to call it Columbus Day? I mean, I'm going to call it Columbus Day anyhow because I'm a troglodyte and I don't really care. But I think you're supposed to call it like Indigenous Peoples Day now or something.
I think the more prudent thing to do is to let everybody call it what they want. If you want to call it Indigenous Peoples Day,
right? I agree,
and I'm good with that.
Again, we're not here to judge you. My point was, next week may be a holiday. I have to check with our producers and see whether or not the studio is going to be open. I know that my kid doesn't have school, and that's basically how I gauge everything on this planet is whether or not my kid has school. So we may or may not see you on the 10th for episode 51. That's the point. But if we don't, we will definitely see you on the 17th. And I have a guest coming on the 24th. It's going to be an excellent show. I'm very excited about. But I don't want to tease it just yet, other than to say on the 24th, we will have a guest that I am very excited about. With that, I want to thank everybody for paying attention. Martinez, this guy, cross-faded guy.
That's my defense. I think everything's funny, even when I'm not impaired. So how the hell do you know I'm impaired?
Thank you guys for being here. Ed, thank you for your time. Miami Communities Newspapers, thank you as always for producing our show. We're grateful and we look forward to being back at your service next week or the week after. Take care, y'all.